third week of our Raising Home Run Kids series. When it comes to parenting, as parents, none of us want to see our kids strike out. The reality is we want to see them succeed in life. We want to see them step up to home plate and bang that ball over the fence and hit that home run. And so we're talking about what are some very practical things that we need to think about in the way that we engage children in our life. And the reality, if you haven't figured out so far, this has so many bigger repercussions than just our relationship to children. It really comes down to how we relate to God and how we relate to other people. I love baseball because of baseball. There's so many aspects of life that you get seen and taught and brought to your attention just through this simple game. That all things start at home. You know, that for the game to really take place, it has to start at home plate. And we talked about in week 1 of our series that it all starts with learning to love God. That the greatest lesson we can teach our kids right off the bat is love God with all that they have. Their heart, their soul, their strength, all of their being needs to be directed to the one that created them. Last week, even though we weren't here, we recorded the sermon, posted it. If you haven't gotten it, I encourage you to catch up. You can find that sermon either on our Facebook page or on our church website. But we talked about, at first base, the importance of really driving home this idea of teaching our children how to guard themselves. The Apostle Paul, we talked about in Galatians, talks that there's 2 natures that kind of drive us as Christians. That there's this egocentric, self-centered pride that he refers to as the flesh that can drive us in our decision-making. Or as Christians, we have a choice that we can surrender ourselves to God and the work of what the Holy Spirit is doing in our lives, and that He can guide us. And so we talked about practical ways and implications of how we engage our children to help move them from being selfish, pride-centered, living by the flesh, and actually being people that learn how to be led by the Spirit in their day-to-day life. Today, we're going to be talking about loving others. And how do we drive home this important relational piece? Because the reality is we want all of our children to be relationally capable kids as they enter into the life, as they interact with other people. And so we're going to dive into that. Now, next week, we're going to make our way to third base, and we're going to talk about, really, it's a competency issue. How do we learn to love what we do? Understanding how God has wired us, how He's gifted us as part of that process. Now here's the thing. Our society oftentimes, our culture is a backwards running culture, meaning oftentimes we leave home plate and we go to third base versus first base. There's a certain pattern that God has put in place for us to be successful when it comes to life. And we want our kids to learn that pattern as early as they possibly can because it's going to help them with success as well. Now, here's the challenge. Oftentimes we try to get to third base at all costs. We may want to just run that direction, which is not the pattern in which God intended. And anytime we do something in the wrong pattern, there's consequences on the other side. Or we run the bases and we cut first base and we cut second base in order to get to third base sooner. And usually we cut the bases out of convenience. But friends, when we cut the bases out of convenience, it always leads to more cost in the end. The last thing I want for you is that as you go through life as a parent, as an adult, that you would look back on your life with regret. I don't want you to get so focused on making it to third base that you forget about the other bases. God has given us some very specific directions on how we're to walk life, and this is true when it comes to how we coach our kids as well. And so that's why we're focusing in during this series on this whole idea of raising home run kids. And so the big idea, if we're wanting to raise relationally capable, relationally competent kids, the big idea that we're going to drive home today is simply this. Love others by treating them the way that I want to be treated. It all begins right here. That we need to teach our children at a young age to love others by treating them the way that I want to be treated. It's actually a principle that Jesus himself taught in Matthew chapter 7. So go and open up your books, your Bibles, to Matthew chapter 7. You can follow along on our digital platform as well. It's called The Weekly. You can pull out your device, type in the URL weekly.harvestflorida.org, weekly.harvestflorida.org, place for you to read through the passage with us, keep notes. There's also study questions to be able to drive home later on during the week as an individual, but I would hope also maybe within a group of people. But in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12 is where we're going to begin. And you will know this verse, most popularly referred to as the Golden Rule. So let's take a look at this. Matthew 7, verse 12. Jesus says, he says, so whatever, say whatever. Let's try that again. Whatever. Thank you. So what he's talking about is in everything, in the way that you interact. He says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you. So in everything that you wish that other people would do to you, he says, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So everything. The principle, what we need to understand is this: the basics to this principle that Jesus is teaching us in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, is the mountain peak. It is the mountain summit of all relationship. I would go even beyond just saying it's not just a mountain summit. This is the summit of Everest in every relationship that we have. This is true whether or not be in your marriage. This principle is true in family, having success in the family. It's true of any hallmark for friendship. This is the thing that makes business successful. This is how you win in community. This is how a church can rise up, is learning to live out this principle. To do to others what you would long or what you would want them to do unto you. And then Jesus makes this interesting statement there at the very end of that. He says, this sums up all the law and the prophets. You go back to the Old Testament, where God introduces the law, some rules for his people to follow to be successful in life. At the same time, it really pointed out where they were not making it, where they were falling short, and drove home this need that they needed a Savior. They needed somebody that could come and make things right, which ultimately Jesus was the fulfillment of. But the prophets taught these things and drove it. You can go to certain books in the Bible, and there's just like list after list after list of these rules and these laws that they were to engage in order for life to go well for them. Some of them were focused on how we personally relate with God, but then also added to the mix was how do we relate to one another? And what Jesus has said, this one principle, what we just read in chapter 7, verse 12, the golden rule, this one principle sums up all of those lists that you see in the Old Testament in one thing. But here's what we need to understand to help us understand how this is actually can become reality in the way that we go through life. Because it's easy for us to read this and go, yeah, it sounds nice, makes a really good statement on my kitchen wall, but it's really difficult when it comes to day in and day out living. Well, yes, if you don't read the previous verses. So I want us to go back to chapter 7, verse 7, and see what Jesus was teaching up to this point that we get to the golden rule. So go ahead and follow along. Matthew 7, starting in verse 7. He says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If then you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, he's making a statement here, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? To kind of give you a summary of what Jesus is saying here from verse 7 to verse 11 and leading up to the golden rule, is that it's totally possible for us to live out verse 12 there because we have a heavenly Father that's going to take care of us. Let me kind of drive this home a little bit more. In a life that's rooted in him, that's where we are connected to a God that wants to be connected to us, a God that loves us and says, I want you to love me. When we are rooted in him, we are connected with him, that we love him too, and we desire for him to be the guiding light in our lives. We know, and we know, and we know that we're going to be taken care of, that we are going to be provided for. And that is the freedom that frees us up to become people that are about other people. Because we're secure in all of our needs. We are secure when we feel empty. We know that our identity is in God and that He's the one that's going to provide for us. See, sometimes we can look at life and we base our life based on really the approval of others. I do this so that they will like me. Friends, if you live solely for the approval of others, you will die by their expectations. He's saying, because you can have a deep confidence in your Father who is in heaven, He is the giver of all good things, all that we really need. Because of the assurance that we have in Him, He will meet our real needs. You now then can live with incredible inner freedom, this impulse just to live out the golden rule, to do good to others as you would have them do to you. You don't have to hoard. You don't have to keep all these things to yourself. When do we hoard? We hoard when we are starving. But how can you interact when you know you have plenty of food? See, our problem comes when we feel like we're on empty. And so we go through life and we give, and then we don't get anything back, and we feel hurt, and we just go, I can't go there anymore, and we just kind of live in our emptiness. But when we find the fact that our identity is rooted in a God who says He loves us and will provide for all of our needs, that identity sustains us to the point that when we're empty, all we need to know is I need to go home, connect with my Father. He's got it all covered with, and I'm going to be taken care of. There is no need that I'm going to go without. And so that truth frees us to engage others and be all about others, to love them the way that we desire to be loved. God hasn't wandered off. God isn't absent. Friends, He's there for you. He will take care of you. Which means, as you go through life, you no longer have to be all about you. Why? Because the Father is about you. This isn't for spoiled kids. This is for surrendered kids. Have you ever taken a child into a candy store and be like, hey, you can get 2 things? And you just watch them. Like, it's like they're sweating and they're like, this is the most pressure-filled moment of their entire life. You know, it's like, I can't screw this up, right? And then very quickly they realize, well, 2's not enough. Well, Mom, Dad, can I have 3? Can I have 4? Can I have 5? And they just want to manipulate the whole situation. They'll do whatever they need to do. Like, I'll do extra work. I'll do extra chores. I need 3. 2's not enough. And we do whatever we need to do. Friends, this passage isn't about us engaging God and trying to manipulate God to get whatever we want. It's not about spoiled kids. It's about surrendering to the one that says, I love you and I will take care of you. That's where freedom comes. And so I have to understand how I want to be treated, which, let's be honest, that comes pretty easy for all of us, right? So Jesus is saying, understand. You need to understand yourself. You need to understand the way that you want to be treated. But here's the problem. Oftentimes it doesn't work. And you know why it doesn't work? It doesn't work because most of the time we stop halfway. We sit there and we define, well, this is the way that I want to be treated. And then we demand others then to treat us the way that we think we need to be treated. See, we stop halfway. Instead of leveraging how we want to be treated and leveraging that very thing in how we relate to other people, what we actually want for them, we stop halfway and we demand the way that we think we need to be treated. And I've seen it played out. You've seen it played out. Where people are like, well, Jesus said you have to treat me the way that I want to be treated, right? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work when we just live it halfway. And so we have to commit as adults to learn and to adjust, to live the whole thing. But we also, when it comes to our interactions with our children, we have to raise our kids to go the whole way. Jesus also didn't say, hey, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. No, he was a whole lot more radical than that. The way he phrases it is love others the way that you want to be loved. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Much more radical. Which, friends, that means that you and I have to be proactively creative to our relationships. Proactively creative to all of our relationships. Now, let me give you 3 ways to how you can drive this home with your children, even in your own life. Because let's be honest, our kids are a mirror to us. That's why it's important to have kids in our lives. Is they point out, where we get it wrong. They keep us humble. And so even as we're having this conversation about driving it home with our kids, it's about driving it home with us too. The first step is simply this. You've got to respect people. Respect people. In other words, value people. How do you value people? Your thoughts, your words, and your actions. Our thoughts, our words, our actions always demonstrate what's really going on deep down inside of our heart. And here's what I've come to realize. Your thoughts will leak. Eventually, it always happens. Your thoughts eventually will come out in your words and your actions. They always reflect what's going on deep down inside. If you're a cynical person on the inside and you really don't value people, it will come out. And in these moments, this is what you have to literally train your mind. You have to train your thoughts to think a certain way. And so you have to teach your children how to value this, how to think this way. That this is the starting point. And the starting point is simply this. God created people. Every person. God created people in His image. And here's the thing. That means that people last forever. And God values them. People matter to Him. And because people matter to God, they need to matter to us. Sure, we can love people and not love God, but Christians, you cannot say you love God and not love people. It is impossible to live that way. And it's not just about loving those who look like you, who talk like you, who dress like you, or even who vote like you. It's about loving all people, valuing all people, even when they're different. But that's hard, right? Easier said than done. Why is it hard? Well, it's hard because they're difficult people, right? How many of you in the room know a difficult person? Raise your hand. Be proud. Yeah. If you didn't raise your hand, you're probably that difficult person, right? Now, we're all difficult people, let's be honest. We all fall into that category. That's why it's not easy. And so we have to teach, we have to train our kids how to think differently. We have to train ourselves how to think differently. And here are some basic steps. There are certain things like in our home that you want to help them pick the right words. So there's no name calling in our house. When you get angry, when you get upset, that doesn't give you the right to call somebody a name. There's no use of sarcasm that hurts, demeans, or devalues another person. But friends, you have to form this in the lives of your kids. You have to form it. You have to teach it. You have to train it. You have to drive it home. It's not something that it just comes natural to do these things. In our home, there are absolutely no I hate yous. That's off limits. Because to say that means I don't really value you. I'm not respecting you in my life. There's no vomit and vacate, which is so popular today, right? Like, I'm just going to tell you what's going on, I'm going to throw up all over you, and then I'm leaving. Which isn't fair. That's not engaging, that's not valuing the other person. And sure, a lot of times people will vomit, and then they come back later and go, well, you know I love you. No, I don't. Your words, your actions say something totally different than what you just did. What you're just telling me. And so you have to guard yourself in this. You have to train them how to think, how to talk, how to act. The second way to drive this home is show compassion. You've got to be a person that shows compassion. Showing compassion literally means taking action to be kind. You're the person that's going to take action to be kind. You do this. Why? Comes out of our principle number 1. Because you value people. Because you value people. Because you respect people. Because God made people, I need to show compassion to them. And this isn't something that is guilt motivated. It's value motivated. And it can be as simple as a 5th grader showing kindness to a 3rd grader. It was last fall. My son came home and was walking off the school bus and walked into our house. He was in 5th grade. Head was kind of down. I could tell something happened. It was early school. Like, buddy, what happened? What's wrong? Why are you so sad? And he looks up and goes, Dad, I just got in a fight on the bus. I'm like, what? Like, if you know my son, like, that's not my son. I mean, not at all. And I'm like, all right, you got to tell me what happened, bud. And I could tell he was distraught about it. And he said, well, one of the neighbor kids was getting picked on and bullied by another kid. And so I stood up and told him, you need to stop. And then that kid came after me. And I'm like, well, so did you finish it? He's like, yeah, I finished it. I'm like, yes! You know, as a dad, I'm like, yeah, right on. But then there's this moment, like, I'm like, buddy, I am so proud of you. Because you showed compassion on somebody in that moment that needed compassion. Compassion can be as simple as a 5th grader showing and being kind to a 3rd grader. It doesn't have to be something crazy profound. But we have to begin somewhere in the conversation and driving this value home. Jesus was compassionate. He was compassionate the way that he interacted with people all the time. But here's the thing. What we need to understand, you can value people without embracing their value system. Our culture says to really value somebody, then you have to actually embrace their own personal value system. That's a lie. That's not true. Jesus didn't do that. A great example of this is go to John chapter 8. In John chapter 8, I encourage you to read through it this week. I'll just summarize really quick for you what John chapter 8 happens. Jesus is teaching, and a bunch of the religious zealots and elites at that time brought before him a lady that was actually caught in the act of adultery. Now, we don't know why the man wasn't there. That's a whole nother conversation. But they bring this woman before Jesus. And the reason why they bring him before Jesus is they're trying to checkmate Jesus. They're trying to, confuse Jesus. They're trying to get him to line up one way or the other so that they can kind of entrap him. Because the Old Testament law said when somebody was caught in adultery that they were to be taken out and stoned. They had the right to kill them right there. And so they brought her and said, Jesus, this is what the Old Testament says. What do you say we need to do? Kind of like, we got you. And we see in John chapter 8, Jesus kneels down into the dirt and he just begins to write. We don't know what he actually wrote. We don't. It must have been powerful. Because when he gets up, done writing, people end up disappearing. Some speculate that he just began to write people's sins of who was in the crowd. Well, you're a liar. And just on and on and on. And then he stands up and interacts. And then he sits down and he starts writing again. Again, we don't know what he wrote. Maybe he wrote names of the people and aligned them with their own sins. We don't know. But he stands back up, looks at the lady, they look out, and the crowd is gone. He turns to her and says, where are your accusers? She says, they're gone. Jesus, being the only one without sin, he stands up after he writes all that and says, the one without sin, you can cast the first stone. Jesus was the only one there that had the right, that had the ability to actually cast that stone because he was sinless. And yet Jesus, in compassion, he turns to her and says, well, neither do I accuse you either. But here's the powerful moment. He turns to her and says, go and sin no more. You can value somebody and not embrace their own value system. Jesus, in that moment, in this woman's life, he showed value, he showed compassion to her, but he still called sin, sin. I see too many people in our churches today, I see it too many people leading other churches today that refuse to call sin, sin just simply because of the pressures of culture today. To not call sin, sin is not loving someone else. That's not showing compassion to them. Why? Sin destroys. Sin causes chaos. The loving thing, the compassionate thing is you can value somebody without embracing their value system. Jesus didn't devalue her worth as a person, as a woman, by not embracing her own personal value system in that moment. Compassion is rooted in the heart of God. We're all sinners. We all could put our life right in the same spot as that woman. We all need the grace of God in our lives. That's exactly why we're starting an after-school sports program. That's exactly why we're looking to start new congregations all around Central Florida. It's why we're engaging in Choices Women's Clinic and so many other things. These are all acts of compassion. Friends, there are people in this world, there are people on your street, there are neighbors in your life that are far from God. And the most compassionate thing that we can do is to go and tell them about the life-giving Creator that longs to have a personal relationship to them, that He provided a way for that to actually take place, that they can live in freedom knowing their sins have been dealt with and have been forgiven. We care about people that are far from God, and I love being a part of a church that is compassionate to its community. And so we've got to show compassion. It begins with respecting people, showing compassion, and the third thing that we need to drive home with our kids is simply this. It's about making friends. It's about how we make friends. There's two levels of friendship. You have big circle friends, right? Where you just acquaintances, people you connect with on a regular basis, but they're just kind of out there. And then the reality is we all have this inner circle of friends, the circle of trust, to quote the favorite movie out there. But not everybody gets into the circle of trust. Not everybody can get into that inner circle. And so we've got to train, we've got to teach our kids who can get into that inner circle. Not everybody in the outer circle needs to be on the inner circle, that they need to find those people that build them up and don't tear them down. Those are the people that you want to begin to engage and think about allowing into your inner circle of friends. Your friends will influence the person that you become. Teenagers, you need to hear that. Who you hang out with, it matters. And so how do you pick those that actually can get into that inner circle? The first thing that we need to teach our kids about who we allow into that inner circle is you want people that do what they say. People that actually do what they say can be invited into that inner circle, meaning that when they say yes, they follow through and yes happens. When they say no, they actually follow through and they know. That is what helps build trust. You know when they say something, you know they're going to deliver, that they do what they say. If they don't do what they say they're going to do, can you really trust them? No. So why would you allow them into your inner circle of friends? The second phase of it is people that you want to consider people that learn to balance give and take. Those that balance give and take. We all know people that take more than they give, right? But there's also the other side of the spectrum, people that give more than they take. That also is unhealthy. And the reason why we want people that can balance the give and take to be part of our inner circle is love requires adjustments. It does. No matter what relationship, to truly love somebody means that you're going to have to adjust from time to time. Life is going to look a little differently than maybe how you thought it would. My son this last March had surgery on his foot. And for a month, he needed help. Couldn't get up, couldn't use the restroom, couldn't take his medicine most of the day. So every night, my wife and I, we split night duty. And one of us slept with him in the guest bedroom just to be there and to help him take care of things. Love requires adjustment. Life had to look differently for that month. That's just what love requires. And so those that get into that inner circle need to be people that have learned that balance. And then the third kind of grid as to who we allow to come into that inner circle is you want people that you can forgive but also improve. People that forgive but improve. What I mean is that there are certain people that are safe and there are certain people that are unsafe. Unsafe people apologize, but they never change. They'll be like, yeah, I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have done that, but they never actually change their behavior. They continue to be a repeat offender over and over and over again. That is unsafe. Don't allow that person into your inner circle. Safe people forgive and try to get better. They work on improving. Forgiveness restores. Forgiveness brings reconciliation. It's the glue that gets relationships further down the road. And so you want to find the people that you can forgive, but you know that they're going to improve on their past mistakes. And it all comes back to where we began. Chapter 7, verse 12. It's about teaching, it's about training, it's about driving home for all of our relationships to be made whole. To love others, and the way we can best love others is to do to them what we would hope to be done to us. But here's the thing. Many times they're not going to do what you want to have done to you, but that doesn't mean you have an excuse not to do it still. When we look at Christ's example, he gave everything and demanded nothing, but just a desire that we would walk with him, that we accept him for who he is, and we seek his guidance in our life. So as we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you with this question. I hope you would wrestle with it today, this week, as we finish out this series over the next couple weeks, and it's simply this. Where are you being casual with relationally critical things? Where are you right now being casual with relationally critical things? Maybe it's, you need to let that thing go. Maybe it's a time of forgive. Maybe it's how you interact with your own kids. I don't know what it is. But here's what we need to know. Jesus was not casual when it came to coming to know you. He wasn't casual in the way that he came to show his love. He did the work. And so we've got to follow that example in the way that we love others as well. In just a moment, I'm going to pray, and when I get done praying, the band's going to come out and they're going to lead us through a closing song. And I want you to pay attention to these words and the hope that Christ brings to all of us. But also part of our worship experience is we take a moment just to live generously and give our generous gifts back to God. We believe here at Harvest that generosity is our best way of showing visible love. Whether or not it be our time, whether or not it be our talents, whether or not it be our treasure. And so this is our moment of the service where for those that value what God is doing here, to be able to give and support the continued ministry of what God is doing. If you're new with us, I want you to know we didn't invite you here to get something from you. Our biggest desire is that we wanted you to connect with Jesus today. Will you pray with me? God, we love you and we're incredibly humbled by the way that you've shown your love to us. And so, Lord, that I pray that we learn to follow your example. I pray that we love others the way that we desire to be loved. Not out of obligation, but because we value it, because you valued us. In your mighty name I pray.